And we are live now. Good afternoon. I'm here today with attorney Spencer KUVIN. He gave me a training, I hope, on how to pronounce his name correctly. I don't know if I did
You
that
did,
correctly.
you did. Thank you.
And I appreciate you being here today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. So I'm an attorney practicing here in West Palm Beach, Florida. I'm a Florida native, third generation, and I have represented victims of all different types of personal injury, sexual abuse, and all different circumstances for now going on about 30 years. And I originally got involved in the Epstein litigation because of a client that I represented back in 2006.
Yeah.
And
So
victim number one.
okay. So let's start that way. Before the incident you're indicating, did you represent victims of sexual assault prior to that?
No, she was actually the first sexual assault victim I had worked with. And she really kind of opened up this field of personal injury litigation to me. And I learned a lot actually in the process. And I've been working with sexual assault victims for the last 20 years since then.
And kind of what one of the things I was interested in is kind of the view of the victim. And we hear about, obviously it's big news, and it's the names are big, but we kind of discard the pain and suffering of the victims. And my understanding is you represented a total of 9 victims in this of Epstein and whatever additional people were involved.
Right.
And you've had an opportunity to kind of obviously interact with them and other counsel and other victims. Perhaps you could describe the issues that those women continue to deal with today.
Sure. And I appreciate the question, because oftentimes when talking about this Epstein story, the victims really get forgotten in the story, and everybody wants to talk about Epstein and the perpetrators. But the victims,
We'll get there.
Yeah, no, I have no doubt. But the victims, they are a cross section really of society when it comes to young women. I represented originally in the proceeding mostly high school girls, ages 14 to 16, that grew up here and some of which were in an underprivileged community here in Western Palm Beach County, and really didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot going for them. Some were what we would call latchkey kids, meaning, their parents are working, they come home from school and no one was there. And really were ripe for being taken advantage of. And after all of this occurred to them, they were afraid, and very fearful of wealthy, powerful individuals that could take advantage of them. Now, after that, and after the original cases got resolved back in the 2000s, and Epstein got rearrested, I subsequently represented 5 other victims, and one of those was in New York. And she was recruited at a horse show by one of the recruiters of Mr. Epstein, and also some other women here in Palm Beach County that were brought into the fold. And, as I mentioned to you, I think before we even started, some of these women still are anonymous up till today, and their names are not disclosed based on what they wish and their wishes.
Was there basically a common fact pattern that basically all these events kind of followed?
There was, and it was a very similar scenario. So the girls would either be recruited directly by Ghislaine Maxwell, or one of the other girls that Maxwell was in charge of would go out and recruit. And it was really kind of a sexual pyramid scheme, if you look at it like that. You had Epstein and Maxwell at the top of the food chain. And so let's say Epstein at the top, you got Maxwell right beneath him recruiting girls. And then he had kind of the super recruiters. Those were girls that were working for Epstein at the time, that were involved in the litigation that we actually sued. That included Sarah Kellen, Nadia Marcinkova, and then there were others in different cities and different states. Then those super recruiters would then go out. They were 20-year-olds at the time, and they would go out and find younger girls. And they would get those younger girls and convince them to come over to the house in Palm Beach to model or give their boss a massage with no mention of any sexual favors or inappropriate activity, just kind of weird stuff. And they would ply them with compliments. You know, you're beautiful, you look gorgeous, and you could be a model. And my boss is in the modeling industry, and he's friends with the owner of Victoria's Secret. And, you know, you really should come out, and we'll pay you $200 if you just come out to the house. This was back at a time when there were no cell phones readily used. I mean, they existed, but, you know, not everyone had them. They were very rare. And, you know, these young women, there was no Uber, there was no Lyft. He would send a taxi to go pick them up, a yellow cab. And then the yellow taxi would drop them off at this house on Palm Beach Island. So in all intents and purposes, they're stranded literally on an island where they don't know where they are, with a man that's very wealthy and other young girls in their 20s, the super recruiters, telling them everything's fine, everything's normal. Don't worry, this is all normal. And just go upstairs and, you know, take your clothes off because, you know, our boss, who is a modeling agent and works in the modeling industry, needs to see what you look like. They would then be convinced to go into a massage room where then Epstein would show up wearing a towel, and only a towel. And then they would start giving him a massage. And the other girls that are there are telling you, you know, these young girls, this is fine, this is normal, everything's fine. Just, you know, use this oil and give him a massage, and then he'll talk to you about modeling.
Now, let me ask you a question. So what you're telling us now, is that information that your clients told you, or is that information that you developed in the litigation?
Both. It was a little of both. So these were the same stories told consistently by numerous women, but it was also contained within the police reports and affidavits that were filed in the criminal case. So a lot of the work that I did at the front end of my case in the civil cases was supplemented with the criminal litigation. So I worked at the early stages with Joe Riccari. Joe was the lead investigator for the town of Palm Beach at the time. And he had developed a lot of information based upon surveillance of the home and talking to a lot of the victims. This was long before the FBI was ever even involved in the case. He had developed a list of victims, and he had videotape of girls going in and out of the home for months. And we utilized the information that Joe Riccari had developed and then built on that in the litigation itself.
Yeah, that was one thing you had mentioned to me before. I think you did an inspection of the property. You were able to go onto the property, and that was in Palm Beach?
Correct. His home in Palm Beach Island. As part of the investigation, I requested what was called a site inspection, which the law permits here in Florida. And the site inspection was because my clients could describe exactly what the inside of this house looked like. And it had a very odd makeup. There was a secret entrance. You know, we call it secret. It was a butler's door to go up into the main portion of the house from the kitchen. So this was a door that would lead to a staircase that was internal in the home that would go up into the master bedroom. And the girls described this vividly. So my point being, how does a 14-year-old know what the inside of your house looks like? Right?
Unless they've been inside. Yeah.
And I needed to verify exactly what the inside of the home looked like, the makeup and how it was designed. So I applied for a site inspection with the court, and that was granted.
Before I ask you about the peculiarities, do you know approximately how many people live on that island? I mean, is it like, you know?
Palm Beach Island is a pretty decent sized island. So I imagine it's in the hundreds.
Oh, hundreds, but not thousands.
No, I don't think it's in the thousands. I think it's in the hundreds, and it's a very exclusive island. You know, the people that live on Palm Beach Island, the homes there, I think the least expensive home that you could buy there is probably close to $5 million.
At the time that you did the site inspection of the property, so that would have been the early 2000s, I presume?
Mid to late 2000s. So we're looking at 2007, 2008.
Okay. Do you know who the neighbors were in that general vicinity?
I didn't.
Okay.
No,
Were these were very large properties?
They're not very large. They're just very expensive because of the
Okay.
location.
Okay.
We're
Okay.
talking the people that live on Palm Beach Island are the top 0.5%. These are people that have a home that is worth tens of millions of dollars,
Mhm.
and it's a second or third or fourth home for them.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
They have house managers, right, that manage the house. They have cooks, they have butlers, they have maids. These are Fortune 100 CEOs that own houses like this.
I guess my question would be slightly like, if you were living next door to Jeffrey Epstein and he was having a big party, you would know about it, right?
Oh yeah, these houses are close together.
Yeah, it's not like I'm in Southern California, and so if I go to parts of Beverly Hills, they have these huge properties, and at times it's sometimes for privacy's sake, so that somebody won't know what's going on. But these were, it was an exclusive area, and that's what drives the cost, not necessarily the size. Gotcha.
Correct. Absolutely. These are zero lot lines. So
Okay.
these mansions are built right up against each other, and the neighbors across the street and the neighbors next to him, if he's having a big party, they know exactly what's going on. And if you're on the second floor of the house across the street, you can probably see into his yard.
And I guess his reputation was well known at, say, 2007.
Absolutely.
He was well known, and he's making lots of noise. So and again, I'm just speculating, but if I'm around him, I probably kind of know what's going on to some degree. I kind of have some knowledge.
Anyone that hung out or around Jeffrey Epstein knew that he hung around young, beautiful girls.
Okay.
Very young, because he would have them at all of his events surrounding him.
Yeah, that's what I hear. I mean, that's what it said. Doesn't sound like necessarily that all of them were underage, but at least
Glenn Maxwell wasn't underage, and some of the super recruiters that he had working for him were in their 20s.
Now, you described earlier to me like three different classes. Kind of, we talked about victims,
right.
Three different classes. Why don't you kind of describe how you kind of define the victim classes?
So the victims really broke into three different groups. There were what we would call the true victims. These are girls that were convinced to go to the home under false pretenses and got suckered into the sexual exploitations with Jeffrey Epstein on a single event, single occasion, and then they never went back again. They said, I'm not going back. That's awful. I'm not doing it. There was a second group that Epstein and Maxwell and the super recruiters would convince them to become sub-recruiters, basically a sexual pyramid scheme where they said, look, we'll give you $50 if you go find another girl to bring to the house. And they brought some girls to the home. So I felt that some of them were definitely victims because they were very young and they were making really poor decisions that adults wouldn't necessarily make. And they were put in difficult circumstances. But they kind of crossed the line between victim and recruiter. Then there were the third category that were the true recruiters. These were girls that were literally on the payroll for Jeffrey Epstein and were recruiting victims and actively out searching for victims to bring to Epstein.
Okay. And those names are public, I think.
Yeah. So in Palm Beach, that was Sarah Kellen and Nadia Marcinkova. And those two were super recruiters that were actually named in a lot of our lawsuits here in South Florida.
Now, I think you mentioned you represent 9 different victims.
Over the years, yeah.
And one of them is public.
Yes.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about that case.
So Caroline went public. She filed her case. We filed on her behalf up in New York and Manhattan. She was recruited by one of Epstein's super recruiters at a horse show in New York and convinced to come down to Manhattan. A friend of hers drove her down under the pretenses that she could be a, quote, model working in the industry and that she was beautiful and all these compliments were heaped upon her just like they would do to the girls wherever he was. And she was then dropped off at the mansion in Manhattan and she was escorted into the mansion. And the time that she showed up, there was actually a party that was going on at that time at the mansion that Epstein was having. She was ushered upstairs and introduced to Glenn Maxwell, who had her get undressed, took photographs of her, and then left, and then came back and said, Mr. Epstein would like to see you after he saw your photos. So she took some Polaroids. Epstein comes in, and he's wearing the towel like he usually does, and there's a massage table, and he gets down, and she starts massaging him, And he then gets up and rapes her. And then Maxwell comes in and joins in, and she's traumatized, grabs her clothes after, and immediately leaves the home and calls her friend in tears to come pick her up at the house in Manhattan.
Well, how old was she?
She was 16, 17 at the time that occurred.
And I think, since that's the case is public, I think you indicated that Prince Andrew was at that particular party. Correct. Also.
So she identified a number of people that were at the party. One of them that she identified at this event was Prince Andrew at the time. She didn't know who he was, but then when she saw pictures of him later, she realized, oh my God, he was at this party downstairs. Now, mind you, Prince Andrew, she didn't say did anything inappropriate to her, but he was at this event with a bunch of young women and girls that were around the party and at the event.
My understanding is, and again, I don't know, but that one of his staff members at some point in time released the names, got sued, ended up going to jail. I forgot the gentleman's name, but there were names that released. I don't think it identified anybody as doing anything specifically. It just threw out a bunch of names. And obviously, everybody's interested, now. Everybody's interested. I have to ask you the question. As far as I know, the name of the current president didn't come up in your cases, as far as you can say, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And it's an interesting situation, since I've done a lot of commercial litigation, and the issue of the customer list, the client list. I don't see how you could have a client list if nobody's been prosecuted, because a client would signify that you had done an illegal act. And unless you did an illegal act, you wouldn't be a client. And so I think it's just the wrong question that's being asked. You certainly could disclose the name, you can disclose names, not the victims, of course. The victims should be, their name should be redacted. They should protect it. If they want to come forward, fine, but otherwise not. Everybody else, and I guess, they'd have the opportunity to apply in court if they wanted to get some protection. But otherwise, if you're, in my view, if you're repeatedly visiting with somebody who commits pedophilia, that's at least worth a question. And maybe there's nothing, no harm, no foul, but at least worth a question. If it happened to be like you're the Xerox guy, you were there once, then that's a different story. But that's kind of my interest. So I know you litigated, and because I saw you on Netflix. That's one of the things I got to see you perform. One of the things I got to see you is depose Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe you could describe that a little bit.
So, two issues that you raise. One is the client list, right? So first of all, in talking about that, in litigating these cases, we never saw a quote unquote client list. That was not something that anyone ever wrote down or created. What they did have was a phone log, right? There were phone records, there were message pads, there were phone notes of people that called the home. We got Epstein's phone book. And the regular procedure would be that somebody would come into town and would call over to the house and either get Maxwell or one of the super recruiters and say, hey, I'm in town. Can you mind sending over a girl? And then they would send someone over to the house, or arrange to have someone sent over. Was there a quid pro quo? If you do this for me, I'll do that. No, that's just not the way that world works. But, if a month later, 2 months later, 6 months later, that person gets a call from Ghislaine Maxwell saying, hey, look, Jeffrey and I want to go to this party, and there are a bunch of people that are going to be in attendance at that party that we want to meet. Can you get us an invite? That person would obviously say yes. Or they say, look, we need you to introduce us to Mr. X because we want him to be an investor and we want him to invest with Epstein. Do you mind introducing us? And that person would go, sure, of course I will, right? So it was favors that were given based upon other favors that were provided. And that's how Epstein worked. He worked in the sphere of influence, whether it was sex or money or pressure.
Do you think it was implied pressure, or was it not explicit? He wouldn't tell you to do something. He would set the circumstances up so you knew what he wanted.
Of course. And then God forbid someone pushed back, then there was implied or direct pressure, right? Well, really? You're not going to help me out? Let's talk about the 15-year-old girl I sent over to your house the other week. That would really suck if that got out, right?
I don't even know if you'd have to. I don't even know if you'd have to say anything beyond about the 15-year-old girl that was there.
Correct.
That might be
Right?
the end of the sentence.
So, I mean, is there direct pressure? You know, it really depended on the situation and what they wanted out of the situation. And, you know, we also know that they had videotapes. We know that there were video cameras in all of the homes. When I did
when you inspected the property in Palm Beach, did you see the cameras, or I think you said camera mounts?
So I saw the evidence of cameras, but the cameras had been removed as well as the hard drives. They had taken them all down. Whatever wasn't taken out of the home before the police came in and issued their search warrant, you know, it was, you know, taken down later. But you could still see where the surveillance cameras had been all over the home, inside the house.
Do you know what the purpose? So the surveillance cameras weren't looking out in the exterior.
He had both. He had exterior cameras, and then he also had cameras inside the home.
I see. Do you know what the interior cameras were for?
Of course.
Yeah.
It was so that he could gather evidence.
Yeah, it seems obvious. It seems obvious. That's the exterior cameras, I understand, for safety. The interior cameras, you know, that doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you're trying to surveil people and then have evidence that you can use, and they know. Yeah.
Compromising material that he could keep on individuals. You know, Caroline, the New York case that we handled, she actually saw the surveillance room. She was escorted by the room, and she was able to talk about the fact that she saw the room that had all of the surveillance cameras in it, and she could see, you know, the banks of recording devices and the TV screens with all the surveillance cameras showing what was going on inside the home.
Were you ever able to get any of the videotapes or see any of them?
No, the FBI took them. That's what we've been screaming about for the last 20 years, that they should release the videos that they confiscated so that we can see who attended these parties and events, blur out the faces of the minor victims that were in them, but show us who was at the home.
Do you have any reason to believe that they don't still exist?
Oh, of course they exist. The FBI has confirmed they exist. They've already confirmed they've got about 300 gigabytes of data that they seized from the different homes. Let's see that material. There's a lot of video. Somebody at the FBI has gone through that material, and you want to know a list. I guarantee that they created a memoranda at the FBI of everyone that they saw on those videos. Let's see that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to ask you, but I presume that there's somebody or somebodies with a lot of money or a lot of power that have stopped all this information from coming out for quite some time. I don't know. What's your opinion of that?
You know, I can't say that for certain. What I can say is that if there are people that are on these videotapes that are either powerful, wealthy, politically connected, that there are probably individuals within the FBI that are very nervous about releasing anything unless they've got cover. Unless somebody in the administration says you have to release this, they're not going to just put it out there.
Do we have any idea? I've heard, you know, like a number of people, and again, I haven't seen the total number, but like 100 people or something that have been released. Do we have any idea of what the total number of people that kind of went through there?
Not went through the homes? No. That I couldn't tell you. I can tell you that the FBI investigated over 40 victims at the time of the original investigation. And then by the time that the fund was set up, there were hundreds of victims that applied to the fund.
Okay. Now, before I ask you about Acosta, because I'm going to ask you about Alex Acosta.
Yeah. I got a lot to say about him.
Yeah. So let's go there. So who is Alex Acosta, and how was he involved in the Epstein matter?
Yeah. So Alex Acosta, at the time of all of this, was the acting U.S. attorney at the Southern District of Florida. And he was the point person that was prosecuting the federal portion of the case. And how this all played out was that, remember I mentioned Joe Ricari, right?
Yes.
So Joe was the lead investigator for the town of Palm Beach. And when he finished his investigation, he suggested that charges should be filed against Epstein. And he turned that over to the state attorney's office here in Palm Beach County. The state attorney then was inundated with Epstein's lawyers, pressuring them, threatening them to not file charges against Epstein.
Do you know who those lawyers were? I mean, you can name them if you remember.
I know that the lead one was Dershowitz. Dershowitz himself came to Palm Beach and pressured Barry Krischer, who was the state attorney at the time, not to file charges. And he printed out, some of these girls' MySpace profiles, and they talked about how, look, these girls are drinking beer and posting photos about it, and they're not credible. And why are you believing these girls? They're probably all lying, and they just want this guy's money, and this is all a scam, right? Barry then made the unfortunate decision that he wasn't going to prosecute at all. Joe Riccieri got so upset that he then elevated it to his boss, the chief of police at Palm Beach, which was Chief Ryder at the time. The chief got so upset that he wrote an open letter to the state attorney's office criticizing them for failing to prosecute. And when they didn't do anything, he then reached out to the FBI and said, you guys need to investigate this. This is bigger than just the town of Palm Beach. That's when the FBI came in and they took all of the evidence that the town of Palm Beach had gathered together and began their investigation. Once they finished their investigation, it got turned over to Alex Acosta, who was the lead prosecutor at the time. Then the pressure campaign came from Epstein's team. Roy Black, right? He had an attorney out of New York, some high-profile lawyer from New York that came down and was pressuring Acosta and having these secret meetings with Acosta. And I say secret because there was a lawsuit over all of those meetings where they secretly agreed to the sweetheart deal for Epstein.
Because the victims are supposed to have some right.
Yeah. So there's a federal act called the Crime Victims' Rights Act that was absolutely violated pursuant to a federal judge who found that Alex Acosta violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act because he never told my clients and other victims that they were negotiating some kind of a sweetheart deal for him. So, they kept it secret and then they entered into this deal. Now, when the deal got entered, I got a phone call from an informant, an FBI informant that called me and said, you need to get down to the circuit courthouse now. And I'm like, what? Why? And she said, get down there now and you'll see why. I literally, I'm not joking with you, bumped into Epstein and his team walking through the metal detectors at the circuit courthouse. Went up to court and saw the plea. And I stood up in open court. I'm on record going, what is going on? I need to serve him with a complaint, which was one of my clients. And that's when the deal got entered.
Do you think Acosta could have made that? And if I recall, it was like 18 months. He served 13 and he had work release. So he was out like 72 hours. He basically was out. He just slept there. Basically, that was it.
He would get out every morning and he would go to his office, which was down the street.
Right.
And he would work all day in his office, which, by the way, he had girls visiting, bringing him food and young girls that, quote, worked for him.
So he's violating his probation probably the whole time.
They weren't minors, but these are 19, 20-year-old girls that he's having paraded around while he's on, while he's supposed to be in jail.
Right.
Right. And
I think he was also in a separate area of the jail. They had kind of
completely separate.
So it was like the most disgusting, showing of priority for somebody.
It was a joke.
Do you believe that Acosta could make that deal without getting approval from somebody above him?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Do you think that would have to get some kind of higher up approval for that deal?
Do you think that would go all the way up to the AG's office in the?
Yes.
And who was the AG? Do you know who the AG was at that time?
I don't remember who the AG was at the time, but I think it was a temporary AG or an acting AG. But my guess and this is just a speculation
Mhm.
on my part, is that the AG would have had to get approval from somewhere else.
Okay. Above them. Okay. So that, yeah, because of the nature of
Because of the
the
nature of the
party.
crimes and the people involved. Yes.
I mean, have you been able to figure out the basis other than being pressured? Have you been able to figure out any basis for Acosta's decision?
No, it was bizarre to us. I mean, there's a whole lot of rampant speculation, but do I have evidence of everything? No. I mean, I don't have any evidence, but why else would he make such an awful deal on behalf of victims of this guy if there wasn't some other motivation? You know, back at the time when it was happening, we were trying to come up with ideas of why he would do this. For example, he used to work at Bear Stearns, and they were investigating, Bear Stearns for financial fraud back at that time. So we thought maybe he was giving them inside information for the investigation that the SEC had with Bear Stearns. Or
That's where Epstein worked there also, right?
he had worked there at Bear Stearns prior. So we speculated that that might be why they were doing it. We knew he had connections with Israel, so we speculated maybe he was an informant or getting him information. We also knew that he had dirt on other people that maybe in politics. So maybe that was it. It was all pure guesses on our part because it just didn't make any sense when it was happening.
Yeah. It just was so, but it was obvious that you were being stopped and that there was an outside force stopping. It wasn't just natural consequences, and bad luck. It was like really pressure.
I was having regular conversations with the FBI and the assistant U.S. attorney at the time. They knew myself, as well as other attorneys that were representing victims, were actively involved in what was going on. And they were intentionally keeping us out of the loop of any of the discussions they were having about any kind of a plea deal that they were going to offer to Epstein. That is unheard of. Absolutely unheard of.
I think you mentioned that there was a lawsuit that was filed for violation of the victims' rights.
Crime Victims' Rights Act under
but the
federal
court
law.
found no damages. That was the
They
outcome.
found no damages, but the judge found that they in fact did violate the law.
Yeah, I don't know how you would prove. I don't know how you suffer damages then. No emotional distress damages. No, I mean, I would think
The problem is that when they wrote the act, they didn't write in a damages provision.
I see.
So it was an act without any kind of enforcement possibilities. So, look, the U.S. Congress wrote this great act that you got to keep victims informed, but then they didn't provide any enforcement mechanism for it.
Now, I saw you take, I was interested in the deposition. I saw you take his deposition. I was interested because maybe you could explain how he answered, and that might be interesting.
So the deposition was a well thought out plan where our team at the time was in discussions with the defense team in the civil case about taking his deposition at all. And there was a fight on that issue because they kept saying that he was just going to take the fifth. Why are you wasting time? He's not going to answer any of your questions. Why would you bother taking his deposition? It's a waste of time. I said, well, I mean, not everything is fifth. I think there are some questions I could ask him that I think are relevant. And even if he does take the fifth, the law says that if he does in a civil context, I can use it against him. So I'm going to ask him whatever I want to ask him. And if he chooses to take the fifth and not answer my question, fine. I'll get it what's called an adverse inference because he failed to answer. Then if he changes his plea later or gets immunity later, he can't come back and now come up with some cockamamie response about, what he thinks.
Right.
So we had to fight that, and the court allowed me to take his deposition. When we got the date, I then got my team together and started spitballing questions that we could start to ask of him to establish the elements of our claim. But then I also wanted to establish some questions that might throw him off guard to be able to get him to talk, to say something stupid and to make a mistake, basically to test him.
Yeah.
So in working with the psychologist and psychiatrist that we had on our team, she advised us, she goes, look, he is a very typical narcissistic sociopath who is sexually motivated. And that type of person, if you want to get under their skin, is you show them no respect. You treat them as though they are stupid, and you ask them questions that attack their manhood. So I then went through the arrest affidavit and started looking at any facts I could use that would be relevant to the case that might satisfy those requirements to get him pissed at me. So
I think it worked.
Yeah. So I also wanted, because I was in regular communication with a reporter that worked for the Town of Palm Beach newspaper. Now, you have to imagine in Palm Beach, right, there's something that's called the Palm Beach Post. That is our major newspaper here in Palm Beach County, is the Palm Beach Post. Inside the Palm Beach Post, there is something that is called the shiny sheet. Now, the shiny sheet is an insert that goes into only certain issues of the Post that are delivered to the island of Palm Beach. And the shiny sheet includes mostly photographs of fundraisers, events, of the rich and wealthy and famous people that are going to parties on the island. Basically, we're great, we're awesome people, look at all this wonderful wealth we have, and we want to see ourselves in the paper, right? And they call it the shiny sheet because they manufacture that paper with a sheen to it. So the newsprint from the regular Palm Beach Post doesn't come off on your fingers. So the rich people on Palm Beach Island wanted a special paper made just for them so they didn't get newsprint on their fingertips. That's the wealth we're talking about here, right? So I knew a reporter that worked for the shiny sheet, and I was feeding her stories about this Epstein litigation throughout the case, and she would report on it. And I knew that was getting under Epstein's skin, and he hated it because he was getting this really bad press, and it was getting circulated to the rich and famous people that he wanted to socialize with on the island. So in preparing for the deposition, I talked to the reporter and I said, I want to get you a video. So I was hoping that the defense lawyer in the civil case would terminate the deposition because of my questions. And he played right into my hand. So I asked the questions that I asked about his manhood that were contained within the arrest affidavit. He got mad. If you watch the video, you can see he's like, is he really asking me that question? And then they terminated the depo. And when they terminated the deposition, I was able to then file a motion for sanctions.
Right. And then it became part of the record, right?
Bingo.
Yeah.
And I attached a copy of the video. I then made a phone call to the reporter and said, today might be a good day to check the public record. And they did. And the rest is history. And that video became public the moment after. When it became public, he filed a Florida bar complaint against me.
Oh, it's funny. Interesting.
Because he was that mad.
Yeah, no, I see it. Yeah, I saw portions of it. And again, it was the only deposition I've ever seen where anybody raised the Sixth Amendment as an objection. I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
And the issue with the Fifth Amendment, just kind of like big picture, is if the answer that you would give would lead to information that might incriminate you, then that's a waiver of the Fifth Amendment. So people are really careful when they do that. Even may not state their name, because that might be enough to lead to incriminating evidence. So I understand it. I appreciate it. And all I noticed that he was really annoyed, and also, that his name shouldn't have been Jeffrey. It should have been Dick, because he looked just like a pomp. Kind of look like I would expect him to. Pompous and just kind of not a guy you'd want to be friends with, honestly.
He's an arrogant guy.
Yeah, it really, really came through. That was one of the questions I had, is, the issue about where he made his money. During your interactions with him, did you kind of have any gain any information or any speculation?
One of his largest first investors was Les Wexner.
Right.
right? And Les was the owner of and founder of Victoria's Secret and many other ventures, commercial ventures. And he gave him a lot of money and property. And we could never figure out why, because he really had no major experience in the financial world. He was a teacher at a private school in New York.
Yeah, I saw he went to some kind of mathematical college.
Yeah.
I don't know.
He was very smart. Don't get me wrong. He was
Uh-huh.
very intelligent when it came to math and finances and all of that. But why Les Wexner trusted him and gave him the money that he did and property that he did made no sense to us early on.
Did Wexner's net worth increase dramatically during that time?
No, I don't think so.
No, so it didn't really correlate.
But it just made no sense to us.
Yeah.
But, he then would trade off of favors and, get money from people and then, try to invest that money for people. And it was all like secret financial transactions that he was working.
Did you ever see any contracts or any kind of agreements that he would get X? So okay. So it was just confusing, if nothing else. Yeah. And I'm sure everybody speculated about, because I've heard all kinds of speculation. But nobody, probably the only one that probably knows is Maxwell. Would you agree? Yeah.
I mean, there were subsequent lawsuits after a lot of them were settled pursuant to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is a federal act that were filed against some of the banks that were funding him. So they may know, right? Deutsche Bank and some of the other banks that were funding him may have information about what he was doing and where he was getting his money and all of that.
Didn't he try to move some money to try to defeat a judgment that you might have been?
Yeah, he moved money around all the time, and we couldn't stop him from it. The courts wouldn't stop him, so he would move money around to try and hide it in offshore, accounts in the Cayman Islands or in the Virgin Islands.
That one of the islands was the Virgin Islands, where he actually had a location, right?
Yeah. I mean, the Virgin Islands, once he got arrested the second time, they seized, I think, close to $500,000 or half a billion.
Yeah.
The beat.
Yeah. And they all of a sudden they became very aggressive and interested at some point, while kind of turning a blind eye prior to that. It appears. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the story was closed and put behind everything by Acosta. He was the one that tried to close the book on this and just kind of put it in his rearview mirror.
Do you think that he committed suicide?
I'll tell you this. I received a call from someone that worked at the jail in a high-level position that was not working there at the time Epstein was there, but worked there prior and had retired. And he called me confidentially after it happened. And he said to me, he goes, "This is not correct. This is one of the highest level security prisons in the entire United States. This is the prison where they kept the guy that bombed the World Trade Center the first time when it didn't come down. And we've had some of the highest value prisoners in the entire world in here. It is a prison within a prison within a prison, meaning there's the prison, then there's a high security level, then there is a supermax high level security inside that prison. Three levels.
That's where he was?
That's where he was. Everything is controlled. Everything is videoed. Everything is on camera. Okay? They have told the public that the two guards at the time that he died fell asleep, that the camera that would have been seeing where he was malfunctioned, that he had been pulled off of suicide watch days before, that we know from photographs his entire cell was littered with bed sheets, cords, ropes, medications.
Looks like a joke.
It's a joke.
It looked like the door was open and like a Costco crew came and dumped all the stuff in there.
Okay. So Either this is one of the most massive failures on the part of the Department of Justice and their jail system ever to allow this to happen, or someone killed him. So, do I know? I don't. But I deal in circumstantial evidence in what I do for a living. And I don't need proof beyond a reasonable doubt in civil court. All I need is what's called a preponderance of the evidence. And the preponderance of the evidence leads me to conclude that he was not committing suicide. One last fact. When you look at the ligature marks, which I've seen on his throat, they are straight across. And he allegedly hung himself from the second level of a bunk bed with a bed sheet. When you do that, and I've seen people that have killed themselves, unfortunately, there is an angular ligature mark because it's coming from a higher level. So it's angled across the throat. His isn't. It goes straight across, almost like someone was behind him.
I see.
And strangled him.
Again, my view is the best case scenario. Best case is that the guards were aware and permitted it to happen, and that's the best case scenario. That's the way I see it. And whatever else, I don't know. I have like two more questions for you. And again, I appreciate your time and I appreciate your insight. And I appreciate, as I told you before, I appreciate you representing victims and focusing on that, because again, they are kind of left. They were left behind. They're still left behind. They're not the focus, and they should be the focus of everybody's attention. Which kind of leads me to Maxwell. What's your opinion of Maxwell and her involvement, and what should happen to her now? In light of she's obviously discussing with the feds now, but what's kind of your view on all that?
Well, let's get one thing straight. Maxwell is a convicted rapist and sex trafficker and a liar. She is someone that deserves to be behind bars for a very long time. Without a doubt. I have multiple clients that put her at the center of the organization in recruiting young girls for sex trafficking. We also know that without Maxwell, there would never have been an Epstein. She was an integral part of the sexual exploitation pyramid that he had developed. Because if you take a 50-plus-year-old gray-haired man and stick him out into society, and he wants to go ahead and try and influence young girls to come over to his house for a naked massage, they're not going to go. They're going to be, even young 14-year-olds are going to realize, no, I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. But you then put into the mix a well-educated, a British accented, well-dressed, well-put-together woman, and you have her then say to the 14-year-old, my dear, you're beautiful. The man I work with is a modeling agent. You should come to our home and talk to him about modeling. All of a sudden, guards are down, right? No young girl is going to truly believe that a woman of this stature, this makeup, this elegance is going to lead her into something dangerous. And that's exactly what happened, right? She was the false pretense by which they were able to convince these young girls to come to Epstein to be taken advantage of. So that's why I say without a Ghislaine Maxwell, there would have never been an Epstein. She is just as guilty, if not more so, than Epstein is.
Yeah, I use the term scumbag frequently, and they both fit in there. But she deserves all the credit that she gets for it, and it was all knowing. It wasn't like she was in the dark. No. That's what makes it such a so putrid.
She was part of the scheme.
Yeah, part of the scheme, and was able to tolerate. She's obviously a psychopath, and obviously she's a lot of issues, and deserves the time.
A lot of daddy issues.
I'm sure with Maxwell, her father. I guess he was a very
very influential, very powerful publisher who allegedly committed suicide off a yacht and fell to his death off of his yacht just when he was being investigated for financial fraud.
I guess there's claims that he was involved in MI5 or he was in intelligence also. I know Epstein, I've heard the same about Epstein and all those people. And listen, if they kind of interacted with enough influential people, they probably interacted with all kinds of people, and it would make sense. And some more interesting than others, for the public at large, it makes sense. How about the ongoing discussions now between Maxwell and the government? Do you have any concerns about those?
I do. Maxwell's a liar. She'll lie to do anything or get anything she wants. So unless she's had a, come to Jesus moment where she honestly wants to try to acknowledge her sins and acknowledge what she's done and be truthful about what has happened in her life and what she has done to people, then she's just going to lie to try and get out. That's all she's going to do. You can't trust anything that the woman says. So, whatever she says is suspect. That's the problem. Unless she has evidence, right? Everybody has asked me, if you think that Epstein was murdered in jail, then why is Maxwell still alive? The only reason I think Maxwell may be alive now today is because of the fact that she probably kept compromising material. And she's told people that if she disappears or if she ends up dead, that material is going to get released. When she was interviewed the other day by Trump's lawyers, she came with a box. What was in the box, right? Is that the compromising material that she has been keeping all these years to keep herself safe?
And is she really safe if she discloses that anyway? I was thinking about, that maybe she would trade information for some favors, commutation of the sentence, a pardon.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what she's going to try and do.
But maybe it's the other way around. Maybe she will not disclose anything in exchange.
I bet it's a combination of both. I bet it's a combination of both. I bet she selectively discloses information to try and satisfy the general public that has been clamoring for this information to get out, and withholds information on key individuals that have said, don't talk about this person, but you can talk about anyone else.
Yeah, I would presume if she gets either a pardon or commutation that you can't trust what her information is. That would be, I think, a fair conclusion.
Look, it's how easy would it be for the U.S. government to say you can talk about anybody but the president? Don't talk about him, but you can talk about anyone else. And if you do and avoid that one person, we'll give you a commutation of your sentence. We can't give you a pardon, but we'll commute your sentence. But we're going to have to wait until the end of the term,
right?
End of my 4-year term, because it's going to look bad if I do it right now.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I think any action would be after, because then the elections would have already occurred, and there's no damage in any type of congressional.
Yeah, you don't care at that point.
Yeah,
right?
No harm, no foul, whatever. Somebody else
will get elected, so whatever. Yeah. I will promise we'll give you that pardon, but it has to be at the end, or we'll give you the commutation, but it'll be at the end of my term.
Yeah. Well, I hope that she doesn't get a commutation. She doesn't get pardoned, and she, listen. I hope her days end in jail. I think that's where she belongs.
Last, I tell you that my clients want her to die in jail. So.
Yeah. So that's my last question. Kind of to leave everybody with that. So what do the victims want now in the current time frame? What do they want to happen?
The victims want everyone who is involved in this exploitation sex pyramid to be disclosed and to be judged by the general public. And a lot of people have been left out of this mix that need to be brought back in, so the public is well aware of their involvement. That includes the super recruiters like Sarah Kellen, like Nadia Marcinkova, and the others that Epstein was involved with, as well as the people that were utilizing the benefits of these young girls that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were trading. Bring them out, disclose the information, and let the public judge for themselves whether or not what they did was right or not.
Yeah, who wouldn't want justice to come to the victims of sexual, of sexual conduct. If again, spoke to you when we started. I have a daughter. Would I want my daughter to go through this? Of course not. And again, they've been kind of discarded. Besides all the issues they have to deal with, they've been discarded. So I hopefully that in the future, the spotlight can be put on them and they could recover, and hopefully there's justice comes for all this, to the extent it can. Anyway, I told you an hour. I didn't want to go beyond that. I really appreciate your time and information. And I wish you luck in your pursuit and in helping victims. And anytime you want to reach out to me or come out to California, let me know. I'd love to hook up with you.
I'll be out there next week. So
okay. Well, if you want to, give me a call.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, thank you. Thank you again for your time, and be well.
Thank you so much.
To everybody out there, have a good afternoon, and thanks for watching.